All right, we're recording. It's all on you.
All righty. Did anybody think to get a verse that applies to what we're studying right now?
Yes, I did. I did my homework.
Let me hear it. Let us hear it.
It's 1 Corinthians 12:13. For we are all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink.
Thank you very much. Lori. Oh, see, I'm going to get confused now. Lori Rigler, did you do your homework?
I couldn't find exactly the answer that I was looking for because there wasn't a very good census information really early in the days. But what I found was that according to the 1790 census in New York, the blacks were approximately 19.3% of the population. There were 181 of them on that census. And of that, 59,557 were free. That's about 8% at the 1790 census in New York.
Thank you. A+ for both of you. Okay, who would like to just start talking about our new chapter? The intimately oppressed. Does anybody have anything that jumped out at you?
Well, something that jumped out at me was that the use of the word planter, because I have seen that in some of my ancestors' description on the census. Is there their profession was planter, and that was one thing that it brought up about the white landowners, but that were still subservient to the plantation masters or something to that effect.
So a planter, did that refer to, I don't remember that. Did it refer to a farmer or a plantation owner?
I think it was the free whites.
Oh.
It was a free white person who owned land.
Oh, okay. Did anybody else notice that?
What I noticed, I was aware of Mary Wollstonecraft in England, but I did not realize how early the women's movement started in our country. I mean,
That's an interesting point.
we miss out on almost a century before, we get to Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
And Lori Ryder, what did you have to say? You have to unmute yourself.
And while she's doing that, just a reminder, you can use the chat box if you want to share any thoughts or have any questions. Feel free to type those in. I'm monitoring that for you as well.
And you're coming across really kind of fuzzy. There's a thing for original sound. If you maybe try the original sound, it might be better.
It's very scratchy sounding, yeah. Lori, I can't hear you. If you're on a desktop, you can hold your space bar down and that'll help you. Now you can. Good.
Okay. So my question is, what chapter are you all on?
I'm not the
3 was where I was talking about, I believe.
Chapter 5.
Could be chapters 5 and 6.
Oh, 5 and
6.
Oh, I may be behind then. Anyway.
That's okay. No problem. Anybody else want to talk about this thing about intimate oppression? No, wait.
Nita, that's okay. We just don't want any overachievers talking from a future chapter yet.
Oh, that's okay.
You can talk about the past ones, just not the future ones.
Listen.
Nita,
Go ahead.
starting in chapter 5, the one thing that I think applies to how things are in this country today was the statement, just about every white male had a gun and could shoot. And we wonder why we have trouble with gun control today, right?
Right.
Okay, it's not an instant thing. I was wrong. It is a kind of revolution. Sorry, chapter 5. It says it right here in my face. So, how much? I'll start asking questions. Since
So I can make a comment.
Okay, Katya, go.
So what I found interesting is how low the enthusiasm for the Revolutionary War was. Like, I think the book said like 1/3 in support, 1/3 in opposition, and 1/3 neutral. But and kind of we've been talking about how this is contradictory to the history that is being taught to us. You know, we always like to think of unity, but something else. Here's quoting from the book: the military became a place of promise for the poor who might rise in rank, acquire some money, change their social status. And the reason I highlighted this is because it's kind of similar to what we have today. You know, someone mentioned last time how witnessing, you know, some kids being recruited. And a lot of the times, you know, going to the military is basically the only way for people to get out of poverty. It could be the only way to get education. And I remember hearing this somewhere, or reading this online a couple of years ago, is that we're never going to have, or why it's so difficult to push the idea of free college in America is because that's one of the, you know, the military lobbies really hard against this, because that's kind of like one of their recruitment tools is, you know, to offer people paths to education.
Well,
Yeah.
this may go back to the experience in this country following the Second World War with the GI Bill, which produced one of the most massive bootstrapping education situations really in world history, and changed the nation. And so this has continued. I do know military people, not only my sons, but others that rose spectacularly, including blacks, because of the education coming through the military service.
Yes, I did too. And that was our first question, Katya. How much colonial opposition was there to British rule in 1776? And the quote he gave was, every white man had a gun and could shoot. And the elite had to woo these people. And many of the, you know, working class people were against British rule, but in general, enthusiasm for the war was very weak among.
Well, like those on the frontier, because of the British treaty line preventing them from moving further west, when they were knew there were better farmland to the west, many people on the frontier were all in favor of the revolution because it could grab better land by moving further west. But the British treaty line forbade that.
And that was the Appalachians, right? The Appalachian.
That was the whole border,
Okay.
from Canada to Florida. They were all limited. Now it's the Appalachians that may have pushed the hardest, but it was the whole border. Pennsylvania, New York.
All righty. What motivated the Colonial Poor to fight the British? I have it on page 78.
Promises.
Pardon?
Promises.
Oh yeah, lies. AKA lies.
Well, I think the concept here of the colonial poor in itself probably is a generalization that's incorrect. Those living in the cities might have a different attitude towards the revolution than those on the frontier. Those who were in the trades had the possibility of lifting themselves and were resenting some of the British taxes. The divide wasn't simply based upon wealth, which Zen tends to push, but it was also one's location, one's occupation, all these things entered into as to whether or not they'd be favor of the revolution.
Any other comments on that question?
But also force, quoting from the book again, the mechanism of their political conversion was the militia. So a lot of people who didn't want to stay, were not personally interested or didn't see any benefit in fighting, you know, and try to run away from the army, they were hunted down and, you know, penalized for that.
Then Virginia started drafting their strollers or their vagrants. So there was a draft even back then. And they did tell lies. They offered bribes, adventure, and rewards.
That's what the
Well-
commercials still say.
Well, that's what I was going to say is in my African American social ethics class that I took in seminary, that was one of the things that they brought up that as white folks, we don't pay enough attention to. But the military recruitment ads target, like Ted and Katya were talking about, is the poor. And they target the African American community with the language and the wooing and all that they do in a disproportionate way. And I had not noticed that, of course, from my perspective until I realized that. And then I started noticing it in the ads that I would see after that.
Well, some of this is so true, but the success is incredible. I had an acquaintance at New Mexico State out of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Very black. First person in his family, I think, to get out of high school. It took him 5 years, and he worked in the college cafeteria to support himself. But he graduated in engineering and a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. And my hat's off to him.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so in some ways it's positive.
But I think something to remember here is what are the other paths that our society offers? That's like pretty much, you know, with the exception of scholarships for those who are academically blessed, you know, and it almost like you have to have some of it, you know, in your DNA, some kind of, you know, propensity for academic success. And the army, those are the only paths. So it's basically, I mean, I'm not criticizing those young people who actually want to go to the army and get education through the army. But I think a lot of young people don't have a choice, you know, it's like that becomes their only possibility to be educated and get out of poverty.
That's right. That's
That
right.
and you know the very small percentage that can avail themselves of the sports scholarships is about the only other thing, but that's a much harder, you're in a much smaller group than trying to join the military. The other thing that the military does is it's a path to citizenship for certain people too. So
Yeah, that's true.
Which
It also
again, we have to
teaches
say that,
discipline.
sorry.
Our youngest was not ready for college. He went straight from graduation Friday night to the induction center Saturday morning. And he spent 16 months active duty enlisted. And then
In the Navy.
And then actually wound up as a corpsman. And then he jumped into college, courtesy of ROTC, and became a Navy nuke. but he was not disciplined, was not capable of cutting college when he got out of high school.
Which is true for a lot of people.
That's the way my brother was. He went into the Air Force to get some discipline and direction with his life because he was floundering and not academic material, really. Katya, you were going to say something?
Oh, I just want to make a comment that, again, this is not to criticize the path to citizenship, but the contrast we see here is how there are no alternatives sometimes. I mean, like other paths to citizenships and, you know, are so lengthy and so hard and are so designed, you know, with privilege in mind. And I'm talking about it as someone who's been through this, but, you know, I have education and mine was much easier because I'm married to a US citizen, but it's an unbelievably hard path. And what I found out is that a lot of Americans have no idea what it takes to become, if not just a citizen, but like even have a green card. There's this misconception that somehow, you know, there's this alternative that is always there and people just choose to like swim across rivers and, you know, go under the fence, and it's just not true. And that's my problem is that, you know, it's sort of the situation is being exploited in order to, you know, attract people to maybe where they would not necessarily go. And this is not to say that, you know, some people don't choose to, you know, go to the military, but it's just, there are a lot of people who are not given the choice, and that is being exploited by the system.
That's very true.
Well, we
Brother Ryan has his hand up.
Okay.
And then I have my hand up.
We were
It works too.
talking about the other ways to get through college. Generational wealth and indentured servitude. Student loans are, I mean, they're a way to keep people on the edge of being enslaved for 10 to 25 years after getting an education that many of them don't actually need, except that jobs say you need a bachelor's degree anymore for jobs that don't actually call for those skills. We have escalated the demand for such things when it's not right for everybody, as some other folks were saying.
I think Frank
has a hand up too.
I hate to admit it, but the recent comment our president made about the person, that's a smart person, why did he go to the military? I kind of came from that background myself, thinking very lowly of the military because of some of the things y'all have been discussing. But they also, back in East Texas, they would send people, says, give them a choice. You can go to jail or you can go to the military. You know, I grew up with hearing that many, many times.
I did too.
Huh?
I did too in Southeast Texas too.
Okay.
We heard that there too.
And so I grew up with a kind of a low regard towards the military, and the coolies. I mean, good gosh, how prouder could you be for their sons serving, and there's such a strong thing going in the military that I didn't have any military family in way back, and so I have very limited knowledge of the military and had a low view of it, and mistakenly low view of it.
Ted?
Ann O'Rourke, did you call on her?
Ted had his hand up.
Yes, in response to the citizenship, I have tutored on 2 or 3 cases for those attempting to achieve United States citizenship. And that testing is so serious, I seriously doubt if half of our high school graduates know enough about US government to even pass it.
True. True that.
Okay, Ann.
We need to get on some more of this.
I just wanted to comment, for a while, the state of New Mexico had lottery scholarships for students who graduated from a state school with a C average or higher. And of course, that wouldn't pay all of their tuition, and they had to get reimbursed after the first semester if they had good grades. But that was something I was so hopeful about, to give kids a chance to continue their education if they wanted to, even though I'm not really sure that gambling is the way to do it, because I think some people suffer with gambling addiction too, and they overspend. So I have kind of qualms about using gambling to support education, but I thought that was something hopeful. I think, now with the budget falls and such and the shortages in New Mexico, I don't know that it's something that will be funded much going forward, but it was one other way that kids could get a little more education if they could get that C average to start with.
I wonder if it would keep them in school as well. Anne, Lovelace, you have to unmute yourself.
One of the things about the lottery scholarship is that they have started, or did start, tightening requirements. So it went from a C to a B, regular B, an 85%, for you to get the bridge scholarship that would let you go to the first semester of college. And then the lottery scholarship came after that. And with our education, and I mean, as a teacher, this is something, as a high school teacher, that I saw. Our classes were too large. There wasn't enough one-on-one help for students. Students who could have made the C struggled mightily to try to get a B. B minus wasn't good enough. They had to average a B. And so I saw more and more kids fall off that particular life raft for going ahead in life. And once they had one semester of high school under them and they realized that, they weren't going to get that B average for whatever reason, whether they didn't have the background to do it, didn't have the support to do it, or whatever, they pretty much gave up. And it was an economic thing that I saw happening in the schools, because it was usually the lower income kids who just plain gave up playing.
Yeah, it usually is. What do you guys think of this idea? This isn't in our lesson, but what do you guys think of the idea of college for free for New Mexico graduates? Ooh,
Can we, it's 3:30. Do we need to move on to the next topic?
Yeah.
Yes.
We need to talk about women's rights here.
Amen.
Now this,
I'm with you.
This is the
I'm with you.
This is the one I said at first. This is the intimately oppressed.
Lori
Yeah.
Rigler.
Can I just go back 1 minute to the revolution?
Sure.
The statement that I wrote down that I think has become kind of a mantra during elections. It said, ruling elites seem to have learned through generations, consciously or not, that war makes them more secure against internal affairs. Haven't we always heard that it's best for an incumbent to have a war for during an election because they don't want to forces midstream?
Absolutely.
I thought that was interesting.
And I made a comment on that as I was reading, because that actually really made me think about constant foreign wars that, America fights, and, to what extent is that a distraction? And it is a good distraction from domestic problems.
Yeah, war has been used that way.
It's an effective distraction, that's for sure.
Eisenhower's military industrial complex and his warning about that this is the way these folks think. It's always more profitable to have a war.
And as Ann Lovelace states in the chat box, but not a war on our own shores. We tend to take it elsewhere. We take it elsewhere. And Katia wrote about the college students, those who come from poverty commonly are not able to cover other expenses of college that are not covered by the scholarship. They need to work full time, which is often incompatible with going to school. That's another reality in talking about the education and looking at minority, impoverished community and that lure of the only way to get out of what you're in is follow the carrot that's being strung in front of you. So it's an unfortunate system.
Well, and I think kind of tying it with chapter 5, you know, that chapter always talked about how the elites made a point of, you know, luring the middle class to their side, or like creating that buffer, you know, between themselves and the poor. And I think, again, I couldn't help thinking about like politics today. I mean, we talk about the middle class, we never talk about the poor, and how a lot of the times for the middle class, it's so hard for us to understand like why kids don't stay in school. And I am guilty of that myself. Like I've never been poor, so it's hard for me. You know, it's even what I wrote is something I know like from literature and, you know, something I heard. And I think that kind of becomes a very effective obstacle politically to passing legislation like free college, because, you know, we keep saying things like, well, if you work hard, you know, you can get through school, or you know, there are scholarships available. And there are certain things that we don't even think about because, you know, we have sort of like, you know, something to fall back onto. So we do become this buffer, you know. We're just as guilty of not understanding what it's like being in poverty. And I'm sorry if maybe someone had that experience and I'm just not aware of. But again, like I had that connection when reading chapter 5.
Well, my big thing is that saying, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. People who say that don't acknowledge the fact that many people don't even have bootstraps. That's an old saying, but people didn't even have the bootstraps to pull themselves up. Lori writes in the chat box, funny that a Republican Eisenhower warned about the industrial complex and now the GOP represents the industrial complex. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, are we undone?
Yeah.
We are undone.
Okay. Back in the dark ages when I went to college, I was able to go to school actually for $900 a year at the University of Texas, which is a major university, of course. I'm not sure that free education is the answer. I think everybody needs to work. I don't think anything should be free, I guess. I think everybody should work for something. And I managed to get through. I had a good time at college. I had a car, but I managed to get through actually on $100 a month. I worked a little bit on the side as a waiter and stuff like that. But when I think about the prices to go to school now, I just shudder. I remember when my daughter was going and she told me how much a semester hour costs, I nearly fainted. But I'm not sure that free education is the answer.
For those who are impoverished, maybe, or those who, like Katya was saying, that would end up having to work hard and not be able to attend to their education because they have to pay too much of their way through. Frank?
Affordable education might be what we discussed instead of free education. I was like, Ron, I went to college for $100 a month. And my parents, I don't think they suffered tremendously, but it was quite a bit of money at that time for them, but it was affordable.
Yeah, I don't my parents, I would never have been able to go to school had I not done the work myself, because my parents were, they weren't able to do it. Let's put it that way. And now I just don't know how people go to school. Even if they aren't poor, I don't know how they go to school.
Ken?
It is
Ken?
a lot more expensive now, and private for-profit colleges have taken advantage of that in the way they loan money to students in amounts and at rates that it's virtually impossible to pay it off in a reasonable amount of time.
Ted?
The inflation rate of college tuition has gone up much faster than the inflation in general. And this is a social problem that's got to be addressed. The other side is having attended a school with a lot of co-ops. I had a roommate one semester who was on workface, so every day he commuted to White Sands Proving Grounds, where he was some sort of an assistant in the computer, probably a card handler, because that was the day of the IBM cards. But we had kids tracking satellites 6 months in college, 6 months overseas sometimes, working, and made enough to pay for the college. It took them 5 years, 6 years, but they needed no outside support. Like in my case, my first year in college, my folks helped me to the effect of $50, and that's what they could afford. But I was working, doing data reduction for White Sands, 20 hours a week, 4.5 years.
Eleanor, you want to move us on to women's rights? We're at 340. We're at 340 now. So do you want to move us on to the next?
Talk a little about the women's movement, and of course it's tied up with the abolitionist movement. In fact, it started with the abolitionist movement and then got tied together in 1840. But some of the questions in here, for example, what effect does private property seem to have on the position of women in society? And I would propose that when the elites are all male, which they were at that time, they tend to see their wives as property too. So, women become property, and there's still a large segment of our society, I think, that think that way. It's only been with the 60s revolution, in which birth control became really possible for most women, that women could be themselves, be what they want to be. Birth control has given control over their bodies, so they aren't tied to that. But there's still a lot. In fact, I'm seeing even more right now resistance to that idea that women should have a right. This is what all this abortion rights and what have you is about. And of course, that's gotten tied up with contraception. Somehow they see that many of the right see contraception and abortion in the same light, which shouldn't be. In my opinion, if you have a contraception, you're not going to have abortion, at least not to the extent that they think we do. So,
Brother Ryan has his hand up. I think he wants to say something here.
Yeah, Bree read a book called They Were Her Property, and it's a book about women who had the title to enslaved people, and how it was a way for women to have power that their husbands could not access, because the ownership rights of those enslaved people was wealth held by a woman. So when you said about private property empowering women, I mean, that goes back to the 18th and even 17th centuries, that it was a way for parents to care for their daughters in a way that their husbands couldn't take from them. Martha Washington is one example of those, that she had enslaved people that George freed all his enslaved people when he died. Wish he would have done it earlier, be a more powerful statement. But he couldn't do anything to Martha's. because he had no access to them. So it's a very old way to give power to women. I mean, unfortunately, it was enslaved peoples, but
yeah. Anyway, this is still a concern here in New Mexico, as Ted pointed out in the lecture. We under Spanish rule rather than English, so it does give women certain rights that they didn't have in the colonies under English law. You know, they can own private property and so forth. Yeah, Lisa.
I was just thinking, I was thinking this through part of the other book, that Native American women are more respected in their tribal situations. Their names go through the woman. The husband has to leave his home and come live with the woman's family. And I just keep getting this this thought that we, our European ancestors were saying, oh, we've got to civilize these people. It's like we should have let them civilize us in several ways.
Yeah. So the Equal Rights Amendment that in the 70s, some of the women's worst enemies were other women. Think of Phyllis Schlafly. She mitigated against passing the Equal Rights Amendment because she didn't think women needed it or deserved it or whatever she thought. So, you know, sometimes women are their own worst enemies. I thought that in the 70s, that was very irritating, to say the least, that she was out there, you know, and of course, she comes from a right-wing, anti-abortion, anti-choice, the whole bit. But anyway, I've even heard that recently at the Republican convention. One gal actually got up there and said she didn't think there should be more than one vote per household for president, and that should be the choice of the man in the house. I mean, this is still around. I guess that's what triggered. I thought, I can't believe this. This is 70 years after what, 1960 or 60 years, and here they are still arguing. 100 years since we got suffrage.
Lori has something to add.
You know,
One of the things that I thought was interesting was that among the women leaders of the suffragette movement, there seemed to be, among certain ones of them, the idea that you can't do two things at once. In other words, you can't work for abolition and women's rights at the same time. You have to do one or the other. So if you're going for abolition, then you put women's rights on the burner and tack it later, that you couldn't do them both at the same time.
yeah, that was the view of some of them. So
and
Well, one of the things that struck me about the place of the woman was that it really wasn't so much in law that it happened, but it was through religion. That it was the religious emphasis. And that's still where it's coming from today when we have women, woman's place is in the home. We still hear that. And for a lot of people, it is accepted. For a lot of us, we say, well, yes, we're in the home, but we can also be out doing other things. But, I've known several women, some even younger than myself, who honestly feel that, that having that going against the family is what they say. Going against the family is wrong and that God will punish them.
It's a religious perspective, as you say, yeah. Lisa?
I just think religion, and I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old, and I was in church before then, and I am still a Christian, but I think religion has screwed up a lot of things in this world. And that makes me sad, because what I know of God, my relationship with God, is so different than I hear other people. And he is the liberator. He's the great liberator. And as religious people sometimes do, they get stuck in what they were told when they were children, or when they were young adults, and they can't seem to break out of that and see that just because you say you're a Christian doesn't mean you always say the right thing. I'll put it that way.
We have to learn to quit creating God in our image.
Yes.
That's what we have to overcome.
Well,
Eleanor?
Brother Ryan had a disagreement. I want to hear what he has to say. What were you?
Are you talking about my comment on intersectionality?
What's that?
He put that in the chat box. Intersectionality directly contradicts the idea of that you can only do one or the other.
Oh.
Yeah, the fact is that oppression comes in lots of layers. That's why we talk about different kinds of privilege. And you can't remove one because then the others just crash down on everybody who suffers them. We have to peel all the layers back at the same time. And it's not that each of us has to do all the work. It's that we need to work together to recognize there are all these overlapping layers and work on the one we're passionate about and partner with people who are working on other forms of oppression, all at the same time.
Intersectionality, Eleanor, is a new term that's being used a lot today for that very purpose of talking about, it's not just one thing or one issue or one situation.
Okay.
It is a complex, multi-layered, heavily involved existence that we have here. And that's the very reason why you see the Black Lives Matter and the Poor People's Campaign joining forces, because it's a both and you can't do one without the other. It's not a moment, it's a movement. That's what he says with
I had not
Barber.
heard that term before.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to make a comment about something that kind of made me smile, not in a good way, but so when the bloomer costume was introduced, one of the professors at the time called it a manifestation of socialism. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because how this ghost of socialism and the fear of socialism is still so alive and being thrown around. I mean, man, like anything that, suggests any kind of change, it's socialism. And when I was growing up, when I grew up in the Soviet Union, which by the way, if you ask any economist, they'll say the Soviet Union never had socialism, it was state capitalism. But it was, the Scandinavian countries that kind of like, we're always joking, like, we're the socialist countries, you guys are, a whole different system that we're not even familiar with. But it's just like anything that, can bring about change. I mean, one of the very effective ways to stifle any change in America is just mention the word socialism, and it's gone.
It's a shut down word. And that people that throw that around don't even acknowledge that we already have socialism in this country. What do you think Social Security is? What do you think unemployment is? What do you think all the Medicare and all of that is? It is a form of socialism.
Well, and including the military and actually, the biggest corporations not paying taxes because we are carrying the costs for them and giving subsidies to oil companies that are not even profitable anymore. All of that is socialism, except for we have socialism for the rich and for the corporations and for the legislators as well, you know. And I'm not saying that I like necessarily oppose that point, but ultimately they have like one of the best insurances that, you know, they can get, and it's the taxes that are paying for that, except for when we bring up the idea that everyone should have that, you know, that becomes socialism. But prior to that, it's not called that. So I just thought it was funny. I mean, it was so ridiculous too that, you know, this new costume that gives a little bit more freedom and movement, that becomes socialism.
Well, and as Laurie states in the chat box, the Green Deal is socialism. And then Jennifer adds that the bank bailouts are socialism. And we had that with the car dealers, the car manufacturing industry. We've had it. It's selective. Pick and choose. What do you want to bail out? And don't call it socialism, but we'll bail them out.
Exactly.
Back at you, Eleanor.
Oh. Okay, the other issue, and this, I don't know that this is necessarily an issue now, but I was thinking of the Salem witch trials, and to go back even further, the witch trials in Europe, and the different legal status and demographic status, if you will, between married and single women. The demographically, studies have been done of both Salem and Europe, and it's arguable that the women who were picked out as witches were the ones who did own property, were single, somehow independent, not under some male domination by a husband or something. This was true in both.
Jennifer wants to get in.
My husband's uncle did a bunch of ancestry study stuff for his family. And one of the Salem witches that was hung is an ancestor of my husband's family. And she was a twice widowed person who had property, but she was widowed, and she was reputed to be, well, actually, if you read the transcripts from this trial, she was quite outspoken and spoke her mind.
Yeah.
And so we're pretty sure that she was made into a witch, both to get as a land grab and to get her farms and to shut her up. And, you know, she was hung, but that's very much the case with that.
We certainly can't have outspoken women with means by any stretch.
I also have an ancestor in Clan McEwen, Elspeth McEwen in Scotland. She was burned at the stake. The last woman to be done so in 1698 in Scotland. And it wasn't the Catholics that did it, it was the Presbyterians. But she also had her own land, liked to read, was educated, and when things started going bad for the neighbors, according to her trial records, they started blaming her because she was an independent woman. So that's why I have such an interest in this, because you know, it ran in the family. So, all right.
Black coffee, it matters. I need one of those.
Oh, anyway, anything else any of you want to put in on women and women's issues or rights, or how we're trying to hang on to them? Yeah, Frank.
Eleanor, you're safe. We no longer burn women at the stake.
We just call them nasty, nasty women, right?
That's right. That's right. They're nasty women.
Yeah, I almost ordered one of the t-shirts. There's one out now said, "I'm a nasty woman."
I am ordering one. We'll get one. We'll get a supply of them.
Yeah, we should. So
I was actually amazed by the courage of some individuals in history. Like, I mean, I heard about Anne Hutchinson, but kind of reading in more detail, it's just amazing how, knowing that you don't have the support system behind you, you know, to still have the courage to be so outspoken and be prosecuted. But also something else that I noted is that, so when feminist impulses are recorded, they are almost always the writings of privileged women who had some status from which to speak freely. And I think that is still sort of current because, I mean, who are the women being talked about today? The ones who have access to media like Michelle Obama, or, you know, women, I mean, I don't know, that women with privilege, and we really don't hear much about, you know, like regular women who are, I don't know, fighting on a daily basis, you know, and working long hours.
yeah, true. I'm trying to catch all these inputs, and
Well, let me share some of what's in the chat box. Katya, what were you referring to when you said that's very interesting? You may not think back. That was a few minutes ago.
Oh no, I was how, you know, women who were prosecuted were, it was all about the land grab, you know, and actually Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, you know, that's what it's all about. What he points out is that it was all, you know, those accusations, that was the dispute of, you know, getting your neighbor's land. So that's kind of, you know, or single women, mainly women who didn't have the support of, or the status of, you know, being married, and therefore were deprived of, or they just simply didn't have the societal respect or any kind of status in society.
And then Brother Ryan acknowledges that we do rake outspoken women over the coals and put them on trial in public opinion. Secretary Clinton is a prominent recent example, and there's still a lot of work to do, that's for sure. And then Anne says that status and food in their stomach gives a person more of an ability to get involved. That's true. That goes back to the basic needs. If you don't have your basic needs met, then how can you focus on anything else? You have to have that first. And there's far too many in this country or in the world that don't have that. And that's part of the work of the church.
That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yep. And if you don't have those basics, you can't move to the next level.
You know,
are you familiar with Maslow's triangle?
Right.
The very bottom one is have to survive.
Right.
Then you have time for social stuff. And then eventually you get up here to the top. If all that's taken care of, you have the peak experience, whatever that is.
Was that self-actualization?
Yeah.
Yeah, self-actualization.
Right.
Well, and that's part of what I share as a white woman is, you know, even with the female issues of equality and recognition beyond gender is a challenge. But as white, I can pick and choose what I can get involved with. And we have to pick and choose to get involved, because as long as anyone is less than whole in this country, everyone is less than whole. If anyone is excluded, marginalized, then the whole system is broken. And so we have to look past our privilege and choose to get involved, because those who are living with racial injustice don't have a choice. They live it every day. And for us to step out of our privilege and to step alongside those who are struggling, I think is a high form of advocacy and partnership.
Last time Nita finished with the question about what we can do, and something that kept coming to me, when I was reading the chapters, and I was thinking, I mean, I know the answer, but it's like this rhetorical question of like, why isn't this the history that is being taught to us? Because we're taught different ideas and certain things are overlooked. And I was thinking about how low the turnout rate is for like smaller elections, like voting for members of boards of education. And the thing is, a lot of people don't realize that it's boards of education. Like, for example, we have like APS, we elect APS board members, like I think 4 years. And it's like below 10% of people vote in those small elections, but it's the boards of education that make decisions which textbooks to adopt. Like several years ago, like in Texas, they were all voting to exclude evolution, exclude, slavery, So one of the problematic things in our society is that, a lot of people, not enough, but more people turn out in, the years of presidential elections, but it's those small elections where a lot of takeovers actually take place. Why did the ideas of Tea Party spread so much? Well, one of their strategies was actually to really recruit people to run for those very small elections that people overlook and elect people into positions that make very important decisions about the resources, about textbooks, etc. And people just feel like they don't need to vote in those elections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and Lori says in the chat box that this keeps lower income people from voting. Definitely does.
And you should see what gets accepted as textbooks. I did that for, I don't know how many years, a lot of years. And they're very white. They're very, they were when I taught. Now I haven't taught for a while, but I remember I saw, what was it? It was the old Jeopardies. They're showing old Jeopardies. And one famous basketball player was on there. I forget which one. You would think I wouldn't. My husband watches them all. But all the questions they asked, and he didn't ring in for a long time. He said, I don't know those. I'm not ringing in looking stupid. It's kind of a joke. But all the questions that were asked, I kept thinking, that's more of a white question than a black question. And it just seems like all of this, even in education, it's very white. And as a teacher, you have to make sure that you don't let it stay that way. But textbooks, they're white.
Texas has too much power with the textbooks too.
Yeah, the big states really drive the curriculum industries. So Texas, California, New York, those are the markets that drive the textbooks that are published for the rest of the country because they have the volume. So that's why it's scary when something happens like what happened with the education in Texas when they started saying, not going against science and stuff.
Right.
Taking out evolution, and they took out a lot of African-American history, slavery, a lot of things that they just didn't want to teach anymore. It's sad.
When I was teaching music, I went to, it was the year to adopt a music textbook. And I went there and I was listening, and then they put one in front of us. I said, this is last year's. This is the one we already have. And he goes, well, Texas wasn't ready to vote on it yet, so we're going to do the music textbook next year. I went, what?
Yeah.
But it is, Texas controls it.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, we're at 6 after. Do we have any more that we need to share? Any assignments for next week?
I would only say that even though women got the right to vote and we appreciate all the work the suffragettes do, the fight for equality still isn't over yet.
That is so true.
Yes.
Next week's already in the can.
Look for the next lecture. We'll be up and running Wednesday morning at 7, and we'll see you on next Sunday.
Thank you all for coming.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you all. Have a blessed week.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Happy Labor Day, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Enjoy the cool weather this week.
Yeah, but don't get in the crowd.
Yeah.
Enjoy the conversation.
We don't want
Good.
anybody getting sick.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.